Coming up next on Art Rocks, the LSU Museum of Art expands its exhibit space by 10,000 square feet, giving us a chance to view more of the state's finest relics.
We are a rich state of artists. There are many, many people making art in the state. We think about music, we think about food. The visual arts are a big segment of it.
We'll visit an interactive art festival in the heart of our nation's capital.
You have the opportunity to not only view art on the walls in businesses, but also participate in workshops.
And discover an artist who uses living canvases.
It's like a painting or something that's hanging on a wall somewhere, but it's on someone's body. And that art lives on forever.
That's all up next on Art Rocks.
Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hello, I'm James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine. Thanks for joining us for Art Rocks. We're here at the LSU Museum of Art at the Shaw Center in downtown Baton Rouge. The museum has devoted more than 10,000 square feet of space to art in Louisiana, an exhibit that showcases the breadth of its fine and decorative collections of Louisiana artworks, ranging from as far back as the 1700s through to the present day. Works include paintings, works on paper, ceramics and sculpture. Curators are confident that art in Louisiana enables the museum to play a more prominent and valuable role in representing and interpreting Louisiana's vibrant and utterly unique art history. I'm joined now by Executive Director of the LSU Museum of Art, Daniel Stetson.
Hello, James.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
Glad you're here.
Thank you. Now, there are 8 galleries that comprise this exhibition space, and we're in the first one now. This is a room that functions as kind of an introduction to the exhibit as a whole. Tell us a little bit about what this is meant to achieve.
I think this room is kind of like welcome to our house and to your house. You know, we have furniture in here, we have paintings, photography, there'll be Newcomb pottery, some silver will be visible. The sense that you get a character and scope of our holdings, but it really is also about Louisiana, and I think the paintings behind us are a pretty great example of that. Newt Heldner's paintings that he did for the WPA, the Works Progress Administration.
Which took place in the 20s, yes?
Yeah, 20s, 30s.
Okay.
You're really talking the Depression era really is where it was. And these talk about the sugarcane industry, you have forestry and a mill, and you have cotton. Yeah. So you're really talking in a way this history of how Louisiana began and the industries that sustained it.
Absolutely.
Particularly, you know, sugar was such a big industry here, and the workers in all of the fields, and this references that kind of place in our American space, really.
Of course, of course.
And over here we actually have a wonderful example of our furniture in a collection, and it's a sugar chest, which, you know, I'm going to open this for you now. I have the right gloves on for it, but I wanted you to see a little bit that inside it is a divided case, one side for raw sugar and one side for refined, and this was and is a huge industry in our region. It was a big industrial aspect of our undertaking. The contemporary photograph above of a current sugar cane worker is an example, and to me this could have been in 150 years ago. It's the same project of work, the same labor that's hard, but to have something this magnificent in your home to house your sugar, that's the value that it really had in our state.
So we're coming now into a gallery that represents the landscape holdings of the collection. Tell us a little bit about the pieces that we'll see in this room.
This is for me an exciting room to be in, just the kind of the sweep of what we hold. And we have a painting by Alexander Lomans, which is an example of Hudson River style painting. Some Native Americans in the landscape and their scale, they're very small, where the landscape is about the sublime and the grand gestures of the West. Well, that was the beginning of great American paintings, but of course when you come to Louisiana, the landscape here doesn't have mountains. Instead, we have what Meeker discovers for us, and these painters start to look at the land of Louisiana and prize it for its beauty and its uniqueness, the swamps, the Spanish moss hanging. That kind of characteristic became something that's predominant even today with some painters, as you know. Yeah, the kind of character.
People like Billy Solitario and some other Louisiana painters that focus on the grandeur of Louisiana landscape.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be vertical with the mountains to be beautiful. And the wet, moist world that we live in and the border of land that we care so much about, this landscape gets revered really through painting and admired and is now shared worldwide.
And how is it different from the European style of landscape painting that came before?
Yeah, when you looked at the Hudson River painting and then you come to these paintings from our region, you'll note that they're not history paintings. We don't have grand gestures of historic figures and battle scenes and things like that for the main. It is about the landscape itself. American painters started to prize it as the sublime, as a statement about what God might present to us in a very spiritual way. There was an emotional kind of spiritual connection to land that was really about the expansion of our nation. Now, the other aspect of our collection here is our paintings from New Orleans that talk about the architecture and the city and how it began to preserve our city. It really helped to save the French Quarter. Looking at these paintings, James, they're more of a modernist touch, and they're an urban landscape, if you will. This is about the look of our cities and the character of them. And in New Orleans itself, these painters helped to preserve that city by presenting its character both visually but also talking about its importance. And the French Quarter that we all love today is in part because painters helped to save it. They lived there, this bohemian life. So James, we're walking now into our portrait gallery, which is really the founding of the museum's collection. And this great wall of European portraits done in a salon style, all the way from 1659, the oldest piece that we have on display, thinking about the 16th century. You go through the 18th and you start to see the changing character. And this collection was given as the start. It was an anonymous gift to LSU to create an art museum. So from that, we continue to expand the collection to American portraiture. This great portrait by Rembrandt Peale, one of the great American Philadelphia painters, painted George Washington, I think, 30 times. One of our great painters, though, he and his whole family, the Peale family. And you kind of come across and see this American portrait style, how it's changing a little bit. The brushwork changes, I think, as you look with detail, you see a little bit of subtle changes, but you still see the European training. They often travel to Europe and study. Some of them are Europeans who came to this country and lived for a long time, French and German and English.
And how does it evolve as you move towards the Louisiana part of the portrait collection?
I think that's fascinating because, again, these painters who were living often in New Orleans, many of them are immigrants, they had studied in Europe, they had studied the paintings and with painters, but they also started to find that there was commission work to be done. Think about that as an artist. You're struggling in any time period, today or any other. And they found that these grand families wanted to capture themselves. Photography had come along in here. You're talking 19th century, you start to get into, and that starts to supplant that at some level, but still not really. You have these great portraits that are made, that are hung in the homes that say, I'm the master of my domain, this is my land, and the kind of accoutrements, his swagger and stuff, and his stance even. The focus is on the figure, the closing, the hands, and some of the painters were better than others. I'm not going to, make claims that as I walk around and disparage any of them, but you'll see how some can do hands better than others, and I find that fascinating as you go. And lace on a piece like this, the complexity of rendering that with its transparency and showing her and her charm really as she sits in the chair. Reminds me of the great Picasso of Gertrude Stein for some reason when I look at this one that's at the Met. Yeah. The way she's sitting, kind of with the weight and the kind of posture in a sense. But you go from these and it takes you all the way around to the 20th century. As you come in, you see this more naturalistic look of American portraiture. I just love this one. Look at the hair, this gentle kind of curls and the character that's here. You get kind of a richness of feeling, and I feel an intimacy with this young woman who's stopped, amidst the reading of a book. She's holding her place with her hands, the kind of gentle gesture. It also shows she's educated. She's a reader. It's making a statement. Now, as you come down, I think one of the most fascinating paintings in here, in a way it's an anomaly, but a great one, is this portrait of Carolyn Deroux by Diego Rivera. So it's not a Louisiana portrait, right? It's not an American painter.
The great Mexican master.
Well, who did work in our country, of course. Great mural in Detroit. But Caroline, who taught at LSU for years and years, is in several of our galleries. Her artworks are presented here. This is a portrait the great painter Diego Rivera did of her. That was in the family that we were very fortunate to acquire. I think both as a portrait for our portrait collection, but also for Caroline, who inspired generations of artists in our state, is really the significant founding principle in a way of the whole art department for LSU. Great artist herself, worked in the WPA and administered other artists doing projects, and this wonderful kind of very solid, almost cubist style, in terms of the face, that the planes of her face. I just find this a very touching image to look at.
It really brings the relevance of the museum and its collection right back home here to Baton Rouge, doesn't it?
Well, you talk about these being our treasures. Well, the university, it's the university, and we are a teaching place, and people can study and learn from this whole room of portraits, and you have great teachers through the history of a school.
All right, so here in the exhibition's contemporary gallery, you have some of the true masterpieces of Louisiana art.
Well, really important, the contemporary world in Louisiana, we are a rich state of artists. There are many, many people making art in the state. The culture itself, we think about music, we think about food, the visual arts are a big segment of it. And somebody like Ida Kohlmeyer, who was one of the grand dames really in our state as an art maker and a sculptor, this is, I think, a beautiful and generous and subtle painting. It's the kind of thing that she was known for as a colorist. Her formal sense was there. Again, sculpture is probably more known for her. She has passed away now, but we even have here at the museum the Kohlmeyer crew, we call it, and it's our young folks that come in and really are energized, and we use Ida as an example, as somebody who lived her life as an art maker, and this is a very fortunate piece for us to have, and it's a good one in this modernist and contemporary section to really have a piece by Ida to place again Louisiana in the history of art of our country.
She was active in the 1950s through the 60s and 70s in primarily
even
New
into
Orleans.
the 80s. Even into the 80s, she passed away. I want to say it was later 80s, but yes, and she was active throughout her whole life as a painter and as a sculptor. Looking at the Kohlmeyer piece, we're in a gallery of art by women artists, and really in this section we're trying to show some of the expanse of art as it continues in our state, and by having that focus, and as you come into the next space, it's art by African American artists in our great state, and John Scott's one of the most important artists that worked here, taught at Xavier, taught many students work. He also has passed away, but I want to point him out because, here we have a great woodcut. The scale of this enterprise, often we think of woodcuts as these smaller objects, and here's a great artist producing something of great grandeur and scale. And I also think, with Stop, all these things leaning, this kind of street material, is he a street artist? What is his message that he's giving to us? I think this still has a contemporary statement to it. I won't take it into the political realm, but he did have political statements in his work and wasn't afraid to kind of confront some of those things as we're struggling still today with issues of race in our nation. And a great artist like this being present in a space like this is a place to have those conversations. It's a safe place to gather and think.
I think Scott was also driven a lot by the musicality of New Orleans, and his work really shows that vibrant explosion of movement and life that the city is.
A lot of African American artists were inspired by music, particularly jazz. I think in New Orleans with its jazz sound, the kind of beat of music and the rhythms you see visually, I think you're right, James.
With me now is Fran Huber, Assistant Director for Collections for the LSU Museum and part of the museum for 15 years now as well, Fran. Now, the museum's silver collection has been a remarkably large and prominent part of the museum's holdings for a long, long time, but this is a new piece, a new contribution to it. Can you tell us a little about what we're looking at?
Yes, what we're looking at here is a 5-piece tea set. It was made by Adolf Himmel and Christian Kukler, who were 2 German immigrants, and they brought with them techniques from Germany. If you think about it, Germany at the end of the 19th century was undergoing a lot of political upheaval, and there were a lot of people moving back and forth, and so there were immigrants in New Orleans who had the taste for this kind of material. This is an extremely fancy piece. It is decorated in quite a different number of styles. The floral decoration that you see all through is very much German in taste. It's made by the repoussé technique, which is hammered from within and then chased and finished off. At the same time, it has a lot of kind of unusual elements, like these Chinese figures as finials for the main pieces. And you think about it, this is the time of Victorian eclecticism. You think about all the various influences.
Orientalism that came
yes,
into
exactly.
art at that time.
And so you're seeing a little bit of that. We were able to purchase this with donated money at an auction in 2014, and this will be the first time that it's been shown in the museum. It's really special for us.
That's wonderful. So Fran, one of Louisiana's most distinctive and recognizable decorative arts comes in the form of Newcomb pottery, and that was a huge feature in New Orleans in the late part of the 19th century. Can you tell us a little bit about the studio and how it came about?
Yes, Newcomb College was founded at the end of the 19th century. It was founded as the women's section of Tulane University. Shortly after it started, they developed a pottery studio, and the idea was that genteel young women had lost their fortunes after the Civil War and needed a respectable form of employment. And decorating pottery was considered respectable. So the women decorated the pottery, but men threw them, that the hard work was still the task of the men.
And going from the late 19th century up towards the early 20th, and we see the style evolve as the studio evolves with it. Can you talk a little bit, because these are arranged chronologically, aren't they? Talk a bit about how the style changed.
These are the earliest pieces here on the left, and if you'll notice, the forms, like this is the iris face, this is one of our finest pieces, and you can see that the glaze is very shiny. The form is stylized, it's just outlined, there's no depth, it's almost print-like in its quality, and it's very well fitted to the form of the pot itself. As you go forward, as various experiments with glaze and taste change, the decoration becomes a little softer. You start, technological changes allow them to make pieces that are slightly sculpted, have a little bit of relief to them, and they gradually become more and more naturalistic. As times continued, again, experimenting with glazes, you'll see that the glazes become more matte. They aren't shiny. Again, you have the relief, and you'll notice that the images are even more realistic and naturalistic.
We see Louisiana swamp scenes and moss here as well.
This became one of the most popular decorations for the pottery, the moon and moss scene, and it was kind of sparked by the popularity of Southern Gothic novels and the picture of the sultry romantic South that they painted, and so the Newcomb artists took advantage of that, and here you see it on the pottery itself.
What a wonderful image.
And as time went on further, Art Deco began to become a popular style in Europe. And Mary Shearer, one of the Newcomb faculty, went to the exposition where Art Deco was introduced and was very impressed by it. And she came back and encouraged the students to work in a more linear style. And you see some examples of that along here, where you get a Deco flavor to it. And again, as we go later, you'll see some of the simple linear designs and also the very soft glaze again. And the pottery lasted really until the Depression. A lot of these pots were fancy things that you might give as a wedding present, for example. And as people's economics changed and their budgets got tighter, they stopped buying this sort of thing, and gradually really it affected the entire arts and crafts movement in the United States, because handmade work is expensive, yes. And so in 1940, the commercial enterprise closed, and they just became a teaching pottery.
Thanks to both the Executive Director of the museum, Daniel Stetson, and Assistant Collections Director Fran Huber for showing us around the new exhibits. Now, here's a list of some of the goings-on in the arts around our state. To learn more about these and other events in Louisiana, visit the website at lpb.org/artrocks or pick up a free copy of Country Roads magazine. LPB's Art Rocks website also features an archive of previous episodes, so to see any segment again, just log on to lpb.org. In our nation's capital, local artists and businesses have banded together to bring an interactive art adventure to the community with the first annual Uprising Festival. We sit down now with one of the festival's organisers to learn more about this inspiring initiative.
Welcome to the first ever Uprising Festival. We're so excited to have you here and to kick this full day of art adventure. Recreative Spaces is an arts organization that stages arts programming in unlikely or underused spaces.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here to kick off the Uprising Festival.
Venture on down Rhode Island Avenue. We have 6 local businesses that are participating and have art happening in them and around them all day long.
A big shout out to everybody for coming out, and I hope that everyone has a great time.
At Uprising Festival, you have the opportunity to not only view art on the walls in businesses, but also participate in workshops, from a dance workshop to poetry to storytelling.
We need your help with this part. It goes like this.
We have DJs, we have live bands, we have live art happening.
Get up and jump around, get up and jump around, get up.
We're really excited to have Rose Jaffe and Kate DeCiccio here doing a live mural today. So they'll be right outside, and they are literally out there sketching and painting away. They'll invite the audience and participants to join them. We're asking people to create a book in our space at Recreative Spaces and take that around with them to the other sites and do different projects. And you get to take those books home with you, and hopefully they are starting to spark conversations that we continue long after the festival, and how, as citizens, how we can make positive change happen in our communities through creative programming. People should come to Uprising Festival because it really allows for people to find their own sense of creativity and maybe discover something they didn't know before. This is really a way for us to all come together as a neighborhood, as a city.
Everyone's heard the expression, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Well, in this week's Louisiana Treasures segment, we are visiting the small community of Glenmora to see where shoppers are satisfying their hunger for anything vintage.
We've been open 12 and a half years, right here in this location. This building, it was the dollar store for 34 years, I believe. We had a cafe in the building next door, and that was the old drugstore. We can date that building back to 1913. Then we purchased the middle section where we have our vintage rentals. We have junk, we have antiques, we have pieces of items that you can make Pinterest projects with. We also have a few new items. We have homemade soaps and jellies and jams. We just have a little bit of everything. There's 22 of us in here as vendors, and it makes for a good variety of items. We get dealers from all over, from as far as Houston and Baton Rouge and Lafayette. They buy here and they can take it back and resell. Then we have our regular customers, which is our bread and butter around here. They really help us stay in business. Some people, we call them our junk fairies. They leave stuff at our front door. Sometimes we don't even know who leaves the items for us, but we appreciate that too. It just makes for a good menagerie, a good collection of junk and stuff right here on Main Street in Glenmora.
And finally tonight, tattoos have been used for thousands of years and for many different reasons. They signify tribalism, self-expression, remembrance, and sometimes just for the sake of standing out in a crowd. But whether you hate them or love them, you can't help but notice this enduring art form.
For me as an artist, it's just about being different. It's a uniqueness, a style that every artist will have, and they'll find, you know, whether it be whatever passion they have, whatever medium.
Hey!
Hey!
Here for you 2 o'clock?
Yes.
All right. He's already set up for you. You can go on back.
Thank you.
That's Saxon on the left.
Hi.
How are you?
Tattooing is unlike anything else in the art world because of the fact that you have so many things, so many variables to count in for.
Things go hand in hand with things like oil painting, blending colors. Like the way you do that, it's like the same thing as how you smooth out blends in a tattoo. Doing watercolor stuff is the same idea because you're going from light to dark with that, and then certain things you have to do just to break down the idea of a tattoo. The industry has changed, the machines, ink, people in the industry, I mean, just all of us. In the late 90s, it was just starting to get popular again, but it was still the whole stigma on bikers, drug dealers, gangsters, prisoners, like that kind of thing still. It's every walk of life. I mean, you couldn't even pick the people that come off the street anymore. You think someone's coming in here for a piercing or something like that. The exact opposite.
There's still that little bit of a closed-minded, which, you know, unfortunately it's going to happen. It's always going to be there in society.
I got a chance to actually have a live canvas, you know, a walking canvas. I mean, we just bring that imagination to them and create something for them to have on their skin.
You know, there's a lot of aspects that will go into it. Body placement, size, especially the location. To have something fit somebody's body correctly, you need to make sure the design is going to complement that area, because it's our job to take a two-dimensional image on a piece of paper, and you need to have it flow with their body. You can't just do one thing on somebody and do it on the next 20 people. It's always something different. You always have to be on your toes to change and do things to make sure that that tattoo is what it should be.
A lot of people sometimes come in with ideas, and then sometimes they don't know what they want. So what I do is I ask questions. You know, what is it that you like? What do you like? What are you about? You know, who are you? You know, what's your favorite thing, or, you know, quote, or whatever. Just try to get to know the client.
If you see a smile, you know from that moment that you home run that tattoo, because every person is going to have that overwhelming sense of joy. A close friend of the family, her dog passed away. That was probably the most memorable. We did the portrait of the dog. Her name's Tippy. That hit me really close because it was one of the first clients that, you know, when she saw it, she cried and she was happy and was going to be able to have the thing that she loved forever with her. But every person that walks out of here, you know, that's my billboard. And one of the truest, you know, philosophies when it's come to tattooing is you're only as good as your last one that you did.
It's like a painting or something that's hanging on a wall somewhere, but it's on someone's body, and that art lives on forever.
That's going to do it for this edition of Art Rocks. But remember, you can find out more about what's going on in the arts around the state on both the Art Rocks and the Country Roads magazine websites. So until next time, I'm James Fox Smith, and thanks for watching.